Recently, Jackie shared a video about hot flashes, and one of the things that can contribute to hot flashes, of course, is hormone imbalances. And today I want to talk about some of the details around hormone testing. What I love is that this conversation is coming up more. Hormones were ignored or even avoided for many years based on a big study that came out around 2000 called the Women's Health Initiative. Unfortunately, that study had quite a few flaws, and many of the findings have been retracted, but we have still been applying that research for 2.5 decades. As a result, many women have really suffered from not having appropriate hormone support or therapy. Now, hormone support and therapy may not be appropriate for everyone, but it can really be life-changing for some women in particular and men as well. And today I want to talk about some of the ins and outs about hormone testing. We're going to talk about who should test, why we should test, when to test, and most importantly, how to test, because there's a lot of confusion there. You can order a hormone test online for yourself now. You can go to your local pharmacy and get a hormone test. Where you can't usually get a hormone test is your doctor. That is insane, in my opinion. Doctors should be leading the charge here in helping people understand what's going on with their hormones and get safe and effective support. So that's why we're going to talk about this hormone testing today, because if you're doing it on your own or going somewhere to get it done but don't know what to do with the information, then you're not any better off. So first of all, why should we test? Well, we should test because if we don't know what's going on, we don't know how to appropriately help. Here's an example. You can have symptoms of too much or too little hormones that feel or look identical, including hot flashes, brain fog, fatigue, weight gain, etc. And if you don't test and we just assume maybe that you're low or deficient in a hormone and we add and give you some hormone therapy, it's going to make you worse if you're already too high. And you can't just tell that by the symptoms. You've got to test. You've got to test to know what's actually going on. So if you're not feeling your best, if you're struggling, this is the second part. Who should test? Anybody who's not waking up feeling awesome in the morning. Anybody who's struggling with weight. Anybody who has brain fog or problems with mood and moodiness, anxiety, depression. Anybody who's having problems with joint pain or brain fog or focus or concentration. All of these things can be connected to hormones. So if you're not feeling your best, definitely consider hormones. As a functional medicine expert, I can tell you two things for sure are probably going on if you're not feeling your best. One is hormone imbalances. Two is gut problems, but that's a whole nother video. So get your hormones tested if you're not feeling your best. Don't just start taking hormones guessing that maybe you're deficient when in fact you might be too high. So who should test is the second thing. Basically covered that already. Anybody not feeling well. Anybody who wants to feel their optimal best. And also anybody who wants to prevent problems down the road. Problems like dementia, heart disease, osteoporosis, things that are going to take away your freedom, your independence, sometimes feel like they take away your very self. That's who should test. Now, here's the thing. When do we want to test? This is absolutely a key. You see, with hormones, there are fluctuations in a 24-hour period. There are significant fluctuations, or what we call circadian rhythms, that affect your levels, especially things like cortisol, but even estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone all have fluctuations in a 24-hour period. In a 30-day period, or a typical 28 to 30-day monthly cycle for a woman, we have huge hormone variations and fluctuations. So if we don't know when you're testing in that cycle, the information really is kind of meaningless. And then once you hit menopause, there are still fluctuations, but the transition from being a cycling woman to a menopausal woman, that period of time, we call it perimenopause, it could last 10 to 15 years for some women. And so if you're going through that, there can be huge hormonal fluctuations. These fluctuations are why some doctors will say, we're not going to test, it won't do any good. I think that's a very short-sighted approach, because if we don't even test, we don't have a clue what's going on. If we test, we know what's going on at that moment for sure, and we can extrapolate that information to look at the bigger picture. Now, you can also do a full 28-day hormone evaluation called a cycle map, and that can be very helpful to determine what's going on in a 28-day cycle, especially if you're in that perimenopause window, or if you're premenopausal and you're having trouble with fertility. This can be a very helpful tool. So when to test is really a key. We want to know where you're at in your cycle, or in a 24-hour period, or even in your life cycles, so that we can apply the appropriate reference ranges to the information we're getting. We've got to know where you're at. You also need to know what time of day to test, because again, especially for example with cortisol, which is an adrenal hormone that helps you regulate stress, you're going to see huge variations between your morning level, midday, bedtime levels, or even middle of the night levels. And I've had people come in and tell me, well, my doctor checked my cortisol, it was fine. They did one sample, it was a blood test, which is not the best way to test. We're going to get to that last. And they said, oh, you're fine. But we didn't look at the whole 24-hour cycle, which is key in knowing what's going on with your cortisol, for example. All right, the last thing, how to test. This is the trickiest part of all. There are three main ways that we can test hormone levels. One is through blood test. This has been considered, I would say, the gold standard of hormone testing. Number one, it's the most probably easily reproducible, and it's been more accessible for some people. And for those reasons, it's been called the gold standard. However, there are drawbacks to blood testing. One of them is that blood testing doesn't necessarily reflect the tissue levels of hormones, which is what's more active. And so if you're, for example, giving a person some estrogen or even progesterone or even testosterone, and you're measuring the blood levels, they may underrepresent what's actually available in your tissues. And so you could say, oh, you're not getting enough, let's give you more, and keep giving more and more. And pretty soon someone is way overdosing, and their blood levels still are not showing a therapeutic level. So that's one of the limitations. Another limitation is we don't even know what the reference range is for optimal for a lot of people. So we're kind of just guessing. And when I say we, I mean the general medical community, not me. The general medical community may not know what the optimal reference range is with those blood tests. All right, so that's some of the pros and cons of blood testing. The next common way of testing hormones is through saliva. Now, what's nice about this is it's not invasive. It doesn't hurt to take a saliva sample, although some people have trouble producing saliva. That indicates other problems we should talk about. But saliva is a good way to indicate your tissue or your free levels of hormones. So it's probably the one I use more often than anything else. But again, we need to know when to collect those samples. We need to know when you collected them so we can interpret the results appropriately. And depending if you're already using hormone replacement, it may not be the right test for you. For example, if you're using sublingual troches, that means a hormone pellet kind of that goes under your tongue, and then you're testing saliva, you're going to get very falsely elevated levels. So we need to know all these ins and outs before we even recommend which test to do for you. The final way that we can look at hormones is through urine testing. And you might say, well, why are hormones in urine? Because that's how they get out of the body. That's how they're excreted, or what we call metabolized. See, we need to use hormones, then we need to lose them. We need to use them and lose them so that you don't have excessive levels and we lose it or get rid of it, excrete it through through the urine. So when we look at urine levels, we're measuring what we call hormone metabolites. And this gets really tricky and is really a key for women, particularly who are worried about breast cancer or maybe have even had breast cancer. And you might be thinking, well, I had breast cancer and my doctor said I could never, ever consider even going near a hormone. And I'm here to tell you that that may not be true for you. This could be a whole nother video that we need to do, but urine testing shows us what pathways your hormones are taking to exit your body. These are called metabolites, and this is absolutely a key at understanding your risks for future problems or recurrent problems, particularly around cancer. It can also affect things like symptoms like migraines, for example, or even gut health. So I'm going to stop here because I could talk about hormones forever, and I don't want to keep you here forever, but I want you to know that it's really important that you test your hormones. Anyone not feeling well should be considering this. The different ways of testing hormones give us different information. There is no one size fits all or one approach fits all when it comes to hormones. I'm going to really encourage you to consider working with an expert who knows all these things and can guide you through all these ins and outs of hormone testing so you can get the best recommendations that are going to keep you feeling optimal, protect your future health, and keep you safe. So I hope this was helpful. Please share what other information about hormones you need. Seek out appropriate help if you're struggling. We're here to help you, and we would love to see you thriving. See you later on the next video. Considering this, the different ways of testing hormones with an expert who knows all these things and can guide you through